Today we have a couple stories about vineyards, about winemaking. And in the New Testament we have kind of three major images, agricultural type of images that are used in the Scriptures. And one of them is wheat, growing wheat and grain. And we've talked about the weeds in the wheat and getting mixed together and so forth, and taking care of the crops and so forth. And we have the vineyards, and we had the stories about the vineyards, and there's several other stories. We also have stories of the shepherd and the lamb, which are very important, which bring together some of the ideas we find in these two, the bread and the wine. So in both these situations, there's some parallels between these two sets of stories, between the grain being harvested and turned into bread, and the grapes being harvested and turned into wine. And in both cases, you have to do some careful preparation. The landowner has to do some work, put in some capital expense to put together the situation so that you can process the wheat and the grapes. The grapes you have to dig a wine press, and that basically that was just a piece of usually kind of a paved area with a lip on the end of it and so forth, and it would channel into a bucket in the middle. Sometimes it had channels that went off to other little reservoirs and so forth. But basically, the work was done by walking on the grapes. You also had to put a wall or a hedge around the vineyard so that animals would not trample the grapes and so forth, and protect them from the elements a bit. Then you had to with the grapes you had to find the vines. You had to find vines that were good. You had to find a cultivated vine. Grapes in their natural state look like berries, and they're generally very sour. And so you would go to another vineyard and you would take a cutting off their vines and so forth, and you would start up your own set of vines. And that's quite a bit of work. And on the side of the wheat, you would have to put in a threshing floor. You'd have to put in a paved area where the wheat could be beaten out and stripped from the stalks, and then they put them together in baskets, and they would throw it up into the wind, and the wind would blow away the chaff. Okay. So there's work involved in that. They have to and again you have to find the seeds for the wheat. Again, wheat at that time was not the wheat we know now. Even the cultivated grapes were not like what we're used to. They weren't the big grapes we get now. And wheat, the head of a stalk of wheat was much smaller than what we get today. What we've bred today. Anyway, so what it shows is that there was some planning and some care in the creation of the vineyard and the creation of the wheat field. So the tender, the landlord, God, put some work and effort into this to make it a suitable place. He tilled the ground and made it fertile and built the facilities that were required. So he gave the tenants everything they needed to produce good fruit. And that's what God calls us to do, is to produce good fruit. That's what when Jesus generally talks about the judgment, that's what he talks about. He talks about producing good fruit. We want to see what comes out of it. And so it says in the psalm here, it said that the people of Israel are the vineyard of the Lord. So very much gives us that idea that we are the wheat field. We are the vineyard. And we have so then it's passed to the tenants. and generally the tenants are a problem. That we're given God hands us over to us, our world, our existence, and expects us to take care of it, to tend it, and help it to bear great fruit, to help the little ones along, and to help them to become good fruit. And then, but in the vineyard, the story of the vineyard in the Isaiah story, they come back and the grapes are wild. The grapes have gone wild. In some translations, it has gone sour, but generally it meant wild. And wild berries had a number of problems, kind of like the weeds getting into the wheat. There were another number of berry vines that would also get tangled in with the grapes, and they would look pretty similar. Hawthorn berries would look pretty much the same, and there's a couple other. Hawthorn berries would just sort of make you upset your stomach. And then there were other berries that they would mix in with the grapes that looked very similar that were actually very, very poisonous. So you created a society here that was mixed, and that you couldn't get the good fruit out of the bad fruit. It became, so the landlord just says, wipe it out, just wipe it out, and I'll use this land for something else. Okay, he's just going to toss it out. If the grapes and the wheat are raised properly, and they're tended properly, and they bear fruit, well, then they go through a process. They go through a process to become useful to human beings. The grapes are going to have to be picked from the vines, and they're going to have to then be possibly set out in the sun for a while. Now, that's how they sweetened them back in a long time ago, with this kind of close to a raisin wine. But then they would have to be crushed, and you'd have to do it, crush it. Then you'd have to separate out all the pulp and so forth, and get the juice, and put the juice into clay jugs and age it and so forth. And there's also involved in the making of grapes yeast. There is a form of yeast that grows on the skin of grapes, and so often it had enough yeast, and it needed the yeast to change the sugar into alcohol. So it gave it the spirit, okay? That process. And sometimes you have to add some other type of yeast mixture into it if you really wanted to draw out the sugar and make the wine more potent. And with the bread, you get the grain, but then the grain has to be milled. It has to be ground in a mill. In both cases, we're crushing here. We have this process of crushing. And then to make your bread, once you make your flour, you would have to use the yeast to raise the bread. You use the yeast to leaven the bread, and to air bubbles. The yeast creates air bubbles in the bread, which makes it fluffy, instead of just a flat piece of bread. And so, in both cases, the process of turning from a grape or a grain of wheat is a process that's required before it's edible to human beings, to be useful to others. Okay, if you want to become to bear fruit that is good for the world, it takes some work, and some of that work, if you really decide that you're going to step beyond your limitations and become a disciple, and what we're called to do, if we're going to move from that point of being a bit of wheat in a field or a grape on a vine, and we're going to move past that where we become something that can give spirit and life to others, we're going to have to go through a process. And that process may not be extremely pleasant. That process might be pretty challenging. I don't think anybody, how many of you want to be crushed? I'm alone. I don't even want to be crushed. So that idea of the transformation that will require us to become bread for the world is not altogether easy. It's going to call a lot from us. It's going to ask us to, it's going to challenge us. It's going to challenge us to look at who we are and look at what our attitudes are, how we work in the world, how we integrate our life into the lives of the people around us. And in doing that, we're going to have to do some introspection. And we're going to need that, and that introspection process is kind of the crushing process. And we have to take a harsh look at ourselves. And that may take several different iterations before we really can crush out some of the attitudes we have, the ideas that we might be defensive. Maybe we're defensive in certain situations. People come to us and want something from us, and we become defensive when we pull back. We might anger easily. We might jump to anger quickly. That's our way of controlling things around us. Is that we're aggressive with people, and we keep them in their place. We might become haughty or authoritative, and look down on people. We can use language. We're very good at this. To use language to treat someone like they're a child or they're diminutive, and that gives us our position. We can put things we can phrase things so that to put people in their place. So we have to look at ourselves and look at our tendencies, and maybe we have shyness that keeps us from doing the things we want to do, and maybe we have issues that have to be resolved and so forth. And that's all just grain for the mill. All that stuff in our lives that happened because the situation we grew up in, the society we grew up in, our innate tendencies, we all have our personality. All of that thing is just grist for the mill. That's just stuff to throw into the mill and get ground down some more. So we think about it that way. We think about looking at those things in our lives that we need to separate ourselves. Maybe we have some addictions. Maybe we have an addiction to we want everyone to like us. That can be kind of an addiction. We feed off of that, and it becomes something that we have to have. And of course, we can have substance abuse and so forth, and all that sort of thing. But the process of stepping out and becoming a disciple is accepting the process. Accepting that we're going to be ground down a little bit. We're going to need to be tempered. We're going to need to be worked a little bit. But then we also going to need that yeast. We're going to need some spirit. We're going to need some bubbles in us. We're going to need that grace that God gives us, that gives us that bubbly spirit, that brings us that joy. Because if we're going to be a disciple and we're going to do that work, we do it in a way that's joyful. It's not a drudgery. Oh, I'm going to serve Christ. We should be happy doing this. We should be overjoyed by the opportunity and the possibility and all the people we start to appreciate all the people we meet, and we see everyone around, and it fills us with life. It becomes a yeast to us. It helps us to grow and expand, and we are able to do things that we never expected we would do. We go places we never thought we would go before. We can change aspects of our lives that we thought we were stuck. We thought we couldn't go anywhere. If you're in a place in your life where you're stuck, that's a good notion that there's a place for growth there. God doesn't want us to be stuck. That's one big things he doesn't want for us. He doesn't want us stuck in a corner watching the world go by, or chasing after things in the world that really don't do anything for you, that don't amount to anything in the long run. He wants us to live productive lives. He wants us to bear good fruit. And he's given us He's given us the vineyard. He's given us the wheat field. He's given us the good soil. He's given us what we need to be good Christians and good disciples. He's given us this richness. And he will pour out his grace to strengthen us in this process. He will pour in that yeast in the mix to give us a lively spirit, to serve him with joy, to be his people. It's also very clear in the readings here about the vineyard about what happens if we don't do this. There's consequences. There's consequences. If the tenants never go out and tend the grapes and separate out the berries and weeds and so forth that want to get mixed up in there, animals trample down the hedge, and so you got to rebuild it. If you don't do that tending work, and if you don't take those steps, well, it's of no use to God. The fruit is not going to be of a quality. It's not going to help anyone. It's not going to bring anything to anyone's life. If you have this muck of a berry, a fruit, or whatever, and if the wheat field is all overgrown with weeds, so we have to make sure we tend those fields and to help each other in tending those fields, that we become rich in become a fruit that can bring life and happiness and joy to the world around us.